Hey, everybody. I'm so excited to get to participate just a little bit this year with Coach East. I'm also really jealous you guys are going to have such a great time at the retreat center. And I wish I could be there in person, but alas, I couldn't make it work. I even thought about trying to surprise Vicky and show up, but I just could not logistically make it work with the dates and all that. But at least I kind of get to see you guys. And I wish I could have done this live so I could have seen you in person, but we're about to head out for a homeschool family camp in Oklahoma called Roundup. So I was not able to do a live recording because I won't be back home yet. However, I get to talk to you about books, and that's one of my favorite things to talk about. And I also get to talk to you about high school kids and reading books, which is probably another thing I really love to talk about. So this session is entitled, let me get my notes up here. I'm sitting here just jumping into this. This session is entitled High School Literature for the Uninterested Teen. And my oldest daughter, actually chose this title, which I thought was hilarious because she actually loves literature classes and stuff like that. But let's face it, not every book is going to speak to every person. So even for kids that like to read, there's going to be times that they read something and they're like, it really wasn't my favorite. Or, I mean, I do that as an adult. So of course, teenagers do. But I really wanted to do this session specifically for kids because I know they're out there. My middle child is kind of like this, who they don't care at all about reading literature or studying literature or any of the normal things that you would do in a high school literature class. So that's really kind of what this talk is geared for. Now, that's not to say that if you have a kid who loves books and loves learning, that there's not some ideas in this session that you absolutely can incorporate. There are. But I'm really wanting to focus on kids that come into a high school level literature or English class and they're just like, I'm going to hate this. I don't like to read. I don't want to read thick, boring old books, so on and so forth. So this session is really geared for that kind of student. Okay. So I'm going to approach this from two different ways. The first way I'm going to approach it is if you do want to incorporate some classic literature into the high school experience for your student. Okay. You don't have to, which is what I'm going to talk about second. But if you do want to, here's some ways to make the classic literature a little less horrible. Okay. So the first thing, and this is something I've learned as I've been teaching literature, how important this step is. I used to really just kind of gloss this over and just be like, yeah, da, 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 and then, okay, let's start reading the book. I now take a whole class period and devote to nothing except context. Okay. Context is really important. We know this when it comes to Bible study, or even when books of the Bible were written, about how important it is to know the context of when something's being written, why it's being written, who wrote it, as much as we can about the life of the author. And just like that's all important in Bible study, it's really important in literature study as well. You need to make sure for a book to be engaging. Now, remember, I'm talking about classic literature here. This really works for any book, but especially classic literature. You really need to take the time to set up when this book was written, world events that were happening around the time the book was written, or maybe in the recent past or so on. The author's life. What did the author live through? What did they experience? Because all of this is going to play a part in the novel that you're going to read. Novels aren't written in a vacuum. Charles Dickens doesn't write books and never talk about the fact that he was raised very poor. And in fact, his father went to prison for debts. That always makes it into a Dickens novel. I can't think of a Dickens novel where he's not talking about the plight of the poor, or I believe it's in Bleak House where he actually has the main one of the characters be put in prison because of debts. He's pulling from personal life experience. All authors do that. So really take the time to set up the context, dig a little bit into the author's life, their background, what they believed. Were they Christian in some kind of way? Were they an atheist? Were they a humanist? All of this is going to play into the way the book is written. Okay. Authors write what they know. And so any of that, world events, their life, the time it was written in, all of that is going to play a part in what is happening in the book. Now, the reason I say that this is important is because if you have a reluctant reader at the high school level, context is going to make a book easier to understand and more interesting. Okay. If you know, for instance, that one of the big beliefs during the Victorian time period when Charles Dickens was writing his novels, if you know that one of the big beliefs was that poor people were poor because they were bad people, and that rich people were rich because they were good people, then when you read Oliver Twist and you see what Dickens does by having a rich kid that is actually orphaned and sent to a poorhouse to live, he is playing with that idea of rich and poor. Because in this case, you have a rich kid being disguised as a poor kid, being treated as a poor kid. And in the end, it's revealed, oh, he's not been poor at all. And what he's playing with there is this idea that if you're poor, you're bad, you're a sinner. And if you're wealthy, then you must be a good person. And so what he's doing is he's saying, look, here's a rich person who Victorian society would say is good automatically because they're rich, but he winds up in an orphanage and very poor. So does that mean he's actually now a bad person? Or is he still a good person, just he's not rich anymore? See, he's playing with that idea. And once you kind of give some background to that, then as you read Oliver Twist with your student, you can really see how what Dickens is doing is he's saying, hey, Victorian society, you guys are completely wrong. Being poor doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you're poor. Okay. In other words, there are good bad people, or there are good poor people, and there are good rich people. So if you point stuff like that out, then when you have to read a classic, if you set up the context of the novel and kind of what's going on there, then as the student reads it, it seems more interesting because now they've got something to look for. Okay. Oh, that's right. Dickens was poor and his family did struggle with money and, all of this. So as they're reading, it makes the book a little bit more alive. Okay. One of the things that I found fascinating that I had never thought of until I started teaching American Lit many years ago, American literature, is one of the pivotal moments in the literature publication occurs after On the Origin of Species by Charles Darwin is published, which is in the early 1850s. You will notice a drastic change in the tone of literature that is being created after Darwin's publication. And that is because what Darwin does with his publication is he basically gets rid of God. And so you have a society and you have these artists, these authors that are now struggling with, so in my books that I used to write or in novels that I read growing up, there was a higher power. There was kind of a sense of shared morality. And now that this guy's published this book, I'm not really sure what's true. And you see that reflected in literature. So one of the things, even if you don't want to mess with going and digging around, is if you read books published after about 1850, they're going to have a much more bleak and hopeless tone to them than books published before 1850. And that is because of Darwin's publication. It changes how the world, how academics viewed life. And so you will see authors come along like Jack London, who was an atheist, and his books are very all about how Mother Nature is the dominant force, how humans are just at the whim of nature, natural effects. That's a direct influence of Darwin. You'll see in books like The Great Gatsby, how F. Scott Fitzgerald is going to tackle some really serious topics and some real serious issues. And then at the end of the book, he has no answer for them. That's because he didn't believe in God. And so what Darwin's book did was it didn't offer an alternative. So when Scott Fitzgerald writes The Great Gatsby, he recognizes all of these sinful, immoral things going on in society, and he talks about them in the novel. And then at the end, there's no answer. That's because without God, F. Scott Fitzgerald had no clue how to answer those problems. How do you deal with the evils of society and sin and all of those things? And so the book kind of ends on a down note. But if your student knows that the reason it ends that way is because Darwin took God away, and now you have all these authors that are really struggling to figure out how to write a story, then all the hopelessness and the bleakness is actually something to be looked for and say, oh, well, this guy's struggling because there's no God anymore in his worldview. Okay. So little things like that, that you can point out that will help books mean a little more, come from a different viewpoint. And just another example here, I'm using books that I've either recently taught or am preparing to teach for next year. This Nathaniel Hawthorne, famous American novelist. Some consider him the greatest American author of all time. Nathaniel Hawthorne had a really difficult time reconciling his Puritan ancestors who participated in the Salem witch trials with Christianity. Okay. So he goes looking for something different. So he's like, man, my Puritan ancestors, they were killing people for being witches, and they weren't really witches. But yet they were saying they were doing this in the name of Christ and in the name of God. And so, is this Christianity thing even real? Do I even believe this? So he goes looking for something different, and he discovers Romanticism. And Romanticism was a philosophy from about 1800 to 1850 that was all about self and nature. And, nobody can tell me what to do. Society's rules are just keeping me down. And if I could just be free and live away from society, then I would be perfect and mankind would be perfect. So this kind of almost like a hippie from the 60s, like, free love and no rules and stick it to the man, that kind of attitude. That was what Romanticism was just, about 100 years earlier. And so Nathaniel Hawthorne falls in with a group like this, and even goes and lives on a commune with a bunch of Romanticism followers. And what he discovers is that it's all hogwash, and that basically this commune was just horrible because people did what they wanted to do and there were no laws. You can guess how a group of individuals trying to live in a community together, how well that worked out. Not very well at all. And so Hawthorne discovers that, this philosophy of life that was supposed to really give him all the answers and make him feel better was hollow. And so what he does then, because he's an author and that's how authors deal with things, they write. And so he takes all of these influences, this idea of Puritans, Christianity, Romanticism, he meshes it all together and he delivers the Scarlet Letter. And so if you know that, then when you read the Scarlet Letter, you can see, oh yeah, this is all that Romanticism stuff that he dabbled in. Oh yeah, this is pure Christianity. Oh yeah, this is that Puritan legalism that Hawthorne's ancestors believed in. You'll see all three of those worldviews mixed up in the book. And Hawthorne definitively, by the end of the novel, comes down on the side of true Christianity as the only worldview that is correct, as the only worldview that offers hope and fulfillment in life. It's a beautifully crafted novel, the way he weaves all this together. But if you don't know his background, your student's going to read the Scarlet Letter and be like, I don't get this. This is dumb. Like, what's going on? Okay. So a little bit of context. That's my first thing to say. If you're going to read classics with your students, give them some context. It helps a lot. Number two, make it relevant. Classic literature is classic because it's timeless. So look at what the book is referencing and just bring those ideas into modern times. So you have the Odyssey. Odysseus is just a guy that's been at war for 10 years and he wants to go home. Okay. And he is dealing with some serious PTSD. When he starts his journey, he is still in war mode. And his men that he's bringing home with him are still in war mode. They have not left the battlefield. And so at the beginning part of their journey, they are behaving in a very warrior type fashion, but not fighting warriors, but with normal people. So they have a lot of bad encounters. And so that doesn't end well. And then he gets stranded. Odysseus becomes tempted by a couple of different women that are saying, hey, Odysseus, just hang out here with me. Why would you want to go home? I have all kinds of wonderful things I can offer you. So there's a lot of temptation for Odysseus in this book. And, over the course of the Odyssey, Odysseus learns that he's his own worst enemy at times, that he has to leave the battlefield behind. He's got to deal with his PTSD issues from war. and he has to learn how to be wise and self-controlled. And then eventually he makes it home. And when he gets home, he's able to put all the lessons he's learned on this journey into action to save his family. Okay. Can we apply that to modern times? Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can. Making wise decisions, recognizing that war is horrible. Even back then it was horrible, that it leaves an imprint, and that one of the challenges with our military men is that, and women, is when they come home, do we help them overcome what they've been through? No, we usually just throw them into the world and say, okay, great, you're home, awesome, just go back to doing what you were doing. The Odyssey proves that is very difficult to do, that you can't just switch it on and off, that there needs to be some transitional times, that you need, all of this. So, if you have a kid that's really into military and combat, the Odyssey is a great book to read about the after effects of that, and how do soldiers deal with coming home, because that's really what the Odyssey is all about, is a soldier coming home. Okay, The Count of Monte Cristo. That book is all about the price vengeance will take upon your soul. You have a guy who's treated horribly. He escapes prison and he decides he's going to personally get revenge on all the people that put him there. And he succeeds. And at the end of the novel, when the woman that he loved is free to marry him, free to be with him, he tells her, I can't be with you because of what I've chosen to do here. I'm no longer worthy of you. And he just walks away from her. And that's the end of the book. And so the whole point of that book is, yes, he got his revenge, but at what cost? He recognized that there was a blackness on his soul, and he no longer could allow himself to be happy with this woman because he had irreparably damaged his soul by taking vengeance upon these people instead of, as the Bible says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. So that's the Count of Monte Cristo. Can we apply that today? Absolutely. People are going to wrong us, and we might wish for them to get what they deserve, but it's not our place to do so. And if we become people of vengeance, then we are going to lose a huge part of our humanity and our soul. And so that's the Count of Monte Cristo. And I could just keep going. I mean, seriously, I've got like 5 more examples here, but for the sake of time, I won't. But I just want you to recognize that in classic literature are these themes and struggles that are universal to mankind throughout time, which is why they're called classics. Okay. And yeah, sometimes the book that's a classic, in the book itself, the message might be horrible. There might not be a good ending, like with The Great Gatsby. I mean, the whole thing just kind of ends with this guy that was so focused on winning back a woman that was already married that he doesn't care that she's married. He doesn't care if he has to do illegal business practices. He doesn't care about any of that. His sole focus is this woman, and then all the people that he becomes friends with, they're just horrible. They participate in any kind of sin you can think of. And then at the end of the book, the guy that is telling this story just says, yeah, those people were so awful, so sinful, that I'm going to go back home to the Midwest, where at least everybody's still got some decency and morality. And that's how the book ends. And there's no answer to what do you do about a sinful, hedonistic culture and people. We already talked about why F. Scott Fitzgerald doesn't answer that. But can we apply that today? Do we live in a sinful and hedonistic culture? Absolutely. And your kid can read about what it's like out in a sinful, hedonistic country by reading The Great Gatsby. They don't have to live it. They can read about it. And then you can talk about it. Okay, what is the answer? What is the answer that F. Scott Fitzgerald didn't have? So even if a book doesn't have, like, it's all pretty and sunshine and roses and lollipops, doesn't mean it's not beneficial from a Christian standpoint. We can learn as much from bad examples as we can from good ones. Let's make sure you talk about it. Okay, next thing when it comes to classical literature, quality over quantity. It took me at least 2 or 3 years of teaching online to realize this. In fact, I think this last year is the first time I've done it. Read less novels over the course of a year and take your time. That is much better to do for your student than trying to cram in a bunch of books because, oh, these are all classics and you probably should read them. Okay. Your child will have a lifetime to read the classics if they choose to do so. Trying to fit all the classic books into 4 years of high school is crazy. I now, as an adult, am starting to read books that I've never read before, that are classics, just because it's kind of my job now, but also because I've discovered, there were a lot of good books out there I never got a chance to read. So I just kind of, pick some and I just start reading them. So less novels, more time per novel. I would tell people this: if you have a kid that's really resistant to classic literature, I would do 1 or 2 classic novels a year and just call that good, then try to read 7 or 8 and struggle the whole time. Okay. Just pick, and you could even offer, well, I mean, at a high school level, let your kid choose. Say, hey, here is this novel and it's about this, and this novel's about this, and this one's about this, and this one, which we're going to read 2 of these this year. Which 2 do you want to read? Okay. And kind of give them a description like I did there with, the Count of Monte Cristo or whatever. Okay, this book's about a guy who's wanting revenge, and his revenge is successful, but in the process, he loses everything that's important to him. Okay. So, oh, okay, wait, that sounds kind of interesting. Can we read that? And I have no problem with reading an abridged version of Count of Monte Cristo. I love the full length one, but for a high school level class, there is a really nice abridgment out there. It's what I use in my online classes. And it still is not a short book, but it's much shorter than the original. So use abridgments if necessary for really long books, like Count of Monte Cristo, Don Quixote, any of the Russian novels are all crazy long. Okay, so quality over quantity. If you're going to include classics in your high school literature and you have a reluctant reader, just do 1 a year, 2 a year, and call it good. There is no need to cram a lot of classic literature down someone who already is a struggling literature person, or maybe it's just not their thing. Get your credit, move on. There's no reason to make it torture. Okay, that being said, and I do think every kid in high school, each year of high school, should have 1 or 2 classic books that they read. That's not going to fill up a year though, right? So here's part 2 of this talk: classic alternatives. Let's say you have a kid, and this is the kid, like I've been talking about, that is not into reading classic books. You've picked out your 1 classic novel that you're going to get your child to read this year. What do you do the rest of the year? Okay, here's some classic alternatives. These are some options. And like I said, all of this could be used with a kid who even likes lit. Some of this stuff's just fun. And if you like to read books, then anything to do with reading books is fun. So any of this would work. All right, the first thing is you can use movies. Movies are storytelling, just like a novel is. It's just visual. So you can use movies. In fact, there's a whole curriculum called Movies as Literature. Seven Sisters Homeschool also has individual units you can purchase of movies as literature. Anyway, so you can use a movie to teach all the parts of a story, just like you would use with a novel. You can use a movie to look at worldview. You can look at a movie to see what is the director, what's his background, what's he wanting to say. So you can do everything you do with books with a movie, because they're both storytelling. One is just in print and one is in motion and pictures. Okay. So movies make a really good alternative. You can also do the movie and the book kind of thing, where you read To Kill a Mockingbird and then you watch a movie with Gregory Peck. So you can do a tie-in like that, or you can just pick a movie. And it doesn't even have to be a movie about a classic book. You could pick a movie like The Maltese Falcon with Humphrey Bogart. And you could say, okay, let's analyze how the director is going to build suspense. Or that's great for a Hitchcock movie as well. Let's look at how Hitchcock is going to build suspense in this movie. We know something's coming. How does he do it? Okay, is it the music that he plays in the background? Is it the way he shoots the film with shadows and darkness? Okay, so like you can analyze all of that storytelling through a movie. So if you have a reluctant reader, do a movie and analyze it the same way you would literature. Another thing, graphic novels. Graphic novels have really taken off in about the past 10 years. And I know there are some teachers that are like, graphic novels aren't real books. I beg to differ. There are some great graphic novels out there that tell amazing stories. Good thing about graphic novels is there's less words on the page. It's illustrated. If you have a struggling reader, this is a really nice alternative. There are actually graphic novels of a lot of classic literature. So if you have a kid who is struggling to read a normal classic literature book, find a graphic novel version. You'd be shocked at how much of a difference that makes. And of course, there are graphic novels that are just good on their own without being a retelling of something else. Persepolis, I believe is how you say it. I knew I should have looked it up. Persepolis is a story from the Middle East, a graphic novel about a young girl that is living through, I believe it's the Iran-Iraq conflict. Oh, I'm going to get it wrong. I shouldn't have started this conversation. But anyway, it's a great graphic novel that tells the story of the Middle East. I know a lot of times we focus a lot on British and American books because we're Westerners, but it's really nice to work in some of those other cultures. And this graphic novel is a great way to do that. Really good story, really easy to read because it's a graphic novel, but well told, interesting, all of that kind of stuff. Just to mention the graphic novel bit here. I have an obsession with graphic novels of Shakespeare plays. So this is my copy of Macbeth, the graphic novel. This is my favorite Shakespeare play. And the cool thing about this series, it's called Classical Comics is the series. And I don't know if they do things other than Shakespeare because I have a few of their Shakespeare ones. But the cool thing about these is they have the original text here, or you can get a plain text version that puts it in more modern English. And this is the original text version. This is the plain text version. I have both of those. And then I have another one of the same series of Midsummer Night's Dream. So they have a lot of these classical comics. And like I said, I don't know if they do other things other than Shakespeare, but especially with Shakespeare, this is a great way to get a kid interested. Like it's got really cool graphics. Another thing I really like about this series that I actually use, even if I'm just reading the normal play, is they give you a little character sheet at the front so you can keep track of everybody. If you've ever read a Shakespeare play, you know that one of the most difficult things is keeping track of who all the characters are. So I really like that at the front of the little graphic novel. Yeah. Okay, so the graphic novels are a legit medium to teach literature with. Again, you can teach everything just like you can with a novel, plot, foreshadowing, irony, all of that. You can do all of that with graphic novels. It doesn't have to be full-on classic works. Another good way to introduce a reluctant learner to some of the classic authors is to use short stories. Most of the famous classic authors, Mark Twain, Edgar Allen Poe, I'm trying to think here, a lot of the Russian authors, because their novels are so thick. When it comes to the Russian authors, I like to use their short stories because nobody has time to read Anna Karenina in a high school class. It would take you like the whole year, even though I love that book. But look at short stories of some famous authors. Steinbeck. Who's the other one? The big famous Southern. Can't believe I just went blank. It'll come to me by the time we end class. As I Lay Dying. Who wrote that? Good grief. Anyway, a lot of these well-known American, British, world authors also wrote a lot of short stories. Use those. Again, I will emphasize that you can teach everything you would teach in a novel via a short story. So if you have someone who's really reluctant to read a novel, William Faulkner, there we go. See, I told you I'd think of his name, William Faulkner. If you have someone who struggles to read a full-length novel by someone like, say, William Faulkner, it's a lot easier to cover one of their short stories and still get a feel for the author, how the author writes, what they do well. So short stories are also valid. I include those in my online classes. I try to every year because it's nice to take a break from reading really long novels and just read something short that'll only take you like a day or a couple weeks to read, or a couple days to read. Okay, another thing, and I don't know, this might get me in trouble. On a transcript, most people just put English and composition 1, English and composition 2, English and composition 3, so on and so forth. They don't expound upon that. There are some colleges that might ask for a book list or whatever, but those are few and far between. So here is Chelli's crazy idea. If you have a reluctant high school reader, learner, when it comes to literature, go by themes instead of the traditional rotation of American Lit, Brit Lit, and World Lit. Okay. In my online classes, that's how I teach: American Lit, Brit Lit, World Lit. And I'm not going to say I hate it, because I don't hate it. We get to cover a lot of good books, but themes are a great way to take a reluctant reader and let them read in a genre that they love. So I'll just give you some here. You could do a whole year on nothing but mystery and Gothic literature. And doing that, you would cover a lot of classic literature. Edgar Allan Poe is the inventor of the detective story with his short story, Murders on the Rue Morgue. So you could start with Poe. You can move on to Sherlock Holmes. You could hit some Agatha Christie. You could hit into the Gothic genre with Jane Eyre. Right now I'm reading The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, who was a contemporary of Charles Dickens. They were actually good friends. And already he's setting up this really incredible Gothic mystery. And I'm only 50 pages into it. So you can cover a lot of classic literature in genres like that and use that for your high school instead of following the traditional approach. So here's just some I thought of. You could do a whole year of mystery and Gothic. You could do a whole year of fantasy. You got a Lord of the Rings fan? Let's dive into some fantasy. You can look at Beowulf. That was a huge inspiration for The Hobbit. So many parallels there. The actual name orcs that Tolkien uses in Lord of the Rings comes from the Beowulf Old English version. The orc, whatever it is in Old English, is actually translated demon. But because Tolkien was a huge scholar of Beowulf, he pulls out the original Old English and works that into his story. So there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with fantasy like that. And it doesn't just have to be Lord of the Rings. There's a lot of other fantasy authors out there. Science fiction, you got a science fiction lover? Oh, well, you need to hit up some H.G. Wells, who basically invented it. A lot of people say Mary Shelley with Frankenstein was actually the first science fiction novel. So you could read Frankenstein. Like I said, you can cover a lot of classic literature using themes and then just kind of spin off of that. Okay. You have H.G. Wells. There's a lot of short stories that cover science fiction type scenarios. Dystopian novels, tons of those. Go back and read some of the old dystopian novels. And there's also utopian novels, in case you didn't know that. Dystopian novels are where it's in the future and the world falls apart. Utopian novels are it's in the future and the world is like perfect. Okay. And there's both kind of novels. We don't write utopian novels pretty much at all anymore. In fact, I can't think of any that have been written in the past 50 years. And that is, again, remember how we talked about context? The fact that we don't write utopian novels anymore is a reflection of the fact that we don't really see a happy ending in our world. Listen to people talk. It's all doom and gloom, and the world's falling apart, and this is wrong, and that's wrong, and that group's wrong, and this group might be right, but I really don't trust them either. Okay, so we live in a very dystopian mindset. Like, we don't picture the future and picture it being better. We just picture it getting worse and worse. This might be shocking to you, but that is not how humanity has always viewed the future. And if you go back a little ways, you'll find utopian books where they think the future is actually going to be perfect, that humanity is going to figure this out. So it might be interesting to do a year of those kind of books and kind of look at dystopian, utopian, so on and so forth. You could do a year of books that do nothing except present various worldviews. That's interesting. You could look at, if you have someone that's really into wanting to know how people think and what they believe, that might be a nice, interesting literature class. If you have a kid that wants to be a world changer, then you could spend a year reading books about people from the past that changed the world. So basically a year of biographies, and talk about what they did, what all these people have in common. How did, what were their backgrounds like? What did they have to overcome? You could have a great year of English class doing that. A year of just comedy books, funny books. There are funny books out there that authors write that are considered classics. Mark Twain is famous for writing books that are a little tongue-in-cheek and funny, like Tom Sawyer. And again, it doesn't have to be a high school level book. Tom Sawyer is plenty challenging for most high schoolers. And it's funny. You got P.G. Wodehouse, who writes British comedy. You have, I'm going to forget. They made it into a movie. Famous, funny play. The Importance of Being Earnest. So you have various comedic books out there that you could read as well. If you have a kid that's really into mythology, you could spend a year on mythology easily. I did that with my daughter when she was in 8th grade. We spent a year doing mythology. And you could do hero's journey stories like the Odyssey, the Hobbit. And that's a story where a character has to make this long, difficult journey. And along the way, they have all these tests and things like that. Harry Potter is a hero's journey story. Gilgamesh is a hero's journey story. So you could bring in some classic literature doing themes like this. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to present to you guys today, is when it comes to doing high school lit with a reluctant learner, the most important thing to remember is nothing's off the table, okay? Your kid needs to read. That is off the table. Don't just sit there and say, okay, well, you don't like to read, so when we do high school level literature, then, you can just watch a few Marvel movies and we'll call that good. There needs to be a little bit more than that. Teach a kid how to read. Find something that inspires them. I will tell you this. When I taught American Lit at our co-op, we had a very boy-heavy high school grade. And so I purposely tried to pick books that were a little more rough and tough, right? Okay. And it was funny because out of that year, their favorite book that we read was The Sea Wolf by Jack London, which is about a guy that gets stuck on a boat. He's actually kind of kidnapped. He falls in the ocean and he's rescued, or he thinks he's rescued. And in actuality, he's kidnapped and on this seal hunting vessel. And he goes all over the Pacific and up north into the Arctic realms hunting seals. And the boat captain of this boat, the name of the boat's the Sea Wolf, he's just crazy. Like he's atheistic. The guy who's rescued is Christian. And so the whole book is basically this huge philosophical fight between whose worldview is correct: the worldview of evolution and atheism, the worldview of Christianity and all that encompasses. And the guys loved it because, there's legit full-on fights, like fist fights and stuff, sword fights. This guy has to fight for his life. Like there's a lot of action, and the boys in my class loved it. And it was funny to me because if you had asked me what book are the guys going to like the most, I would not have picked that one. But it's something, and it really spoke to them. I guess the idea of having to figure out what you believe and then defend it. Which is what that book's about. What do I believe and what am I willing to do to defend it in light of antagonism from someone else? It's a very interesting, uniquely crafted novel, which, like I said, Jack London himself was an atheist and believed all that. So he's really wrestling within himself on the pages of this book of, this is what I believe, but am I right? Is this guy right? I don't know. It's brilliant. It's really well done. I like Jack London a lot. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to give to you guys today. Just a little bit of encouragement that once you get to the high school years, literature can be what you want it to be. And even with a reluctant student, there are some things you can do to make it more interesting, to make it more palatable. And over encompassing all of this, though, I really can't help but hammer home the importance of discussing these things with your student as they're reading them. Especially if you have a student that is reluctant when it comes to literature, the worst thing you can do is hand them a book, a movie, a graphic novel, a short story, any of the things we've talked about, is just hand it to them and say, go read this, and then you can answer some questions about it later. That's pretty much the surefire way to make a kid hate books more than they already do. So the important thing is discussion, discussion, discussion. Try, if you can, to read as your child's reading. Okay, read what they're reading, which might be a good reason to only do 1 or 2 classic novels a year. Moms might can fit that in instead of having to do 7 or 8. So just read what they're reading, talk to them about what they're reading, bring up some of these ideas. Hey, I noticed when we were reading Frankenstein that the creature blames Frankenstein for the horrible decisions he's made. Do you think that's fair? Do you think it's not fair? Okay, now you've got a conversation going. Okay, and I can guarantee you that a teenager is going to have a lot of thoughts about when it comes to, are my parents making me do this? Is it my choice to do it? If I struggle in life, is that my parents' fault? Have you ever met somebody that blames everything that's gone wrong in their life on their childhood? Not to discount the awfulness that some people have in childhood, but is that a crutch we can use our whole lives? These are all kind of things that are being wrestled with in Frankenstein, believe it or not. So, have these kind of discussions with your kid. And another thing I'll hear a lot of moms say is they'll say, well, I don't know all of that stuff. Here's the amazing thing. I don't either. I love to read books. I read a lot of books, but all this stuff I'm talking about, I learned. I taught myself because I had to. I teach online classes. I kind of have to know what I'm talking about. So I don't think I have time to give you source or some ideas of where I get my stuff. One of you know what? Here's what I'll do. I will create some kind of document and send it to Vicky that has some mom helps. Like if you're sitting here going, wow, all this sounds great. How in the world do I do this? How do I provide context for my student? How do we have discussion about these things? What graphic novels, what short stories? I can give you guys a list of resources. I can do that for sure. And I'll send that through Vicky. That way, if anybody is like, I don't know, I'll send some mom resources for mom education, like to help you talk about this stuff. Things that have proven useful to me. And I will send like some book lists, kind of like, if your kid is into dystopian, if your kid's into fantasy, if your kids, here's some books that would all kind of work together to cover those things. Anyway, yeah, so I hope you guys have a great retreat. I hope this was helpful a little bit, maybe. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the weekend. And hopefully sometime soon in the future, I can be there with you guys again. I love all my Coach East sisters. And you guys do a great job. I just want to say that. I know that you do a great job. I have some of your kids in my online classes, and they're so wonderful. And so I just want to give you a little bit of encouragement. You homeschool moms, especially my coach moms, my Church of Christ homeschool moms, y'all do a much better job than I think you ever realize or give yourself credit for. And I know that we get hard down on ourselves a lot of the times, that we're messing things up, that we're ruining things, that we're going into this blind and we don't know what we're doing. And that's where God's grace is going to step in. And I see it all the time. You guys are doing a wonderful job. So just wanted to give you that little bit of encouragement. Hopefully this talk has been helpful and encouraging, just to stick with it with those reluctant high school kids. They're going to be okay. Just work with them, tweak things, make it work for your family. That's the number one thing about homeschooling anyway. All right. I'll see you guys. Bye.